Hello and welcome back to part 2 of this introduction to Office 365 Cloud Phone System, in which we will be discussing how to configure your phone system. Now please do bear in mind that this is a very high level overview of how to configure your phone system environment. We will be discussing the requirements for both calling plan and direct routing options, as well as looking at what the high level steps are to get your environment up and running. So let's get started. So firstly, let's have a look at how we set up a phone system using Microsoft Calling Plans. Now, of the two options, Microsoft Calling Plans is by far the easiest to set up. Apart from IP phones, if you wish to install them, there isn't any hardware requirement. Just be careful though, because Microsoft Calling Plans are only available in certain regions. If Microsoft have been able to come up with an agreement with the local telco, you will be able to purchase Microsoft Calling Plans. Please do have a look at the country and region availability for calling plans. If phone system is available in your area with calling plans, you can proceed with this. You will first need to buy a phone system license. Now you can do this in one of two ways. If you have up to 300 users, you can buy the Microsoft 365 Business Voice license. The Business Voice license includes your phone system license, as well as your calling plan and your PSTN audio dial-in conference license. If, however, you have more than 300 users, you will need to buy the phone system and the calling plan licenses separately. Once you have bought all the necessary licensing, you will need to assign them to your users. You will then need to acquire user and service numbers and assign any of your users who you wish to have telephony for those numbers. For call queues and auto attendance, you can use the service numbers. I would also recommend that you set up communication credits. Communication credits allow you to call numbers that are not in your calling plan license, such as premium rate numbers or international numbers. And that's it. That's a very high level overview of how to configure Microsoft 365 calling plans. And that's it. That's a very high level overview of how you can configure calling plans. Now let's talk a little bit more about direct routing. Now, I don't want to make this video all about direct routing because direct routing in itself is a very complicated area and subject of Microsoft Teams. What I do want to quickly highlight is that you will obviously need a certified session border controller. Now, the ones that I have worked with personally are AudioCodes and Ribbon, and I would highly recommend AudioCodes to anyone who is interested in a direct routing setup. But of course there are others and they're constantly being updated, so check out the Microsoft documentation pages for more information. Aside from that, you will obviously need your SIP trunk in order to bring your PSTN connectivity into your telephony environment. Now the rest of these are fairly complicated by the looks of things, but actually quite simple. Basically, your SBC has to be available to the world. So the Microsoft servers have to be able to see your SBC as well as your users. That's why you will need a public IP address, a fully qualified domain name, public DNS entry, and obviously your SSL certificate and your IP address and ports configured on your firewalls. The last thing you're going to need there is obviously your phone system license. Now, unfortunately, even with direct routing, you cannot overcome this hurdle. You must buy the phone system licensing in Office 365 to deliver your telephony into Teams. Okay, so again, I don't want to dwell on this too much because to configure direct routing is, of course, a very complicated business. But very, very high level, here is what you're going to be doing in order to configure your direct routing environment. So you're going to want to connect your SBC to Office 365 phone system, and you want to validate that that connection is working before you proceed to do anything else. The next thing you're going to want to do is obviously enable your users for direct routing. Now this will be in 2 steps. You will want to ensure that you have assigned your phone system licenses to your users. Then you will want to go in and actually assign your users telephone numbers. Now these telephone numbers are not going to be purchased by yourself from Microsoft, but instead they're going to be given to you by your telephony provider who is providing your SIP trunk. At this time you can also configure their voicemail. Now it might sound a little bit difficult to configure the voice routing, but actually it's quite simple. You're going to want to set up a voice routing policy, which is essentially a container for PSTN usages, which can be assigned to a user or to multiple users. PSTN usages, by the way, is a container for basically voice routes. Now this can be shared in obviously different voice routing policies. You're also going to want to configure your online PSTN gateways. Now this is essentially a pointer to an SBC that also stores the configuration that is applied when a call is placed through the SBC. I must admit, the next stage is optional, and this only really applies if you want to translate numbers on inbound calls or outbound calls. So I appreciate that was a whistle-stop tour of how to configure your Office 365 phone system environment, and there are, of course, a lot more things to consider. As we go through the next few videos in this series, you will start to understand a bit more about that, and hopefully we'll gain a bit more understanding as to how this is actually done in practice. So thank you to you all for watching this first part of my series on Office 365 phone system. And as ever, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch.